The morning mist clings to the North Sea like a burial shroud, and somewhere beyond that grey veil, death is rowing toward your village. You don't know it yet, but in less than 3 hours, your entire world will be reduced to screaming, smoke, and the glint of foreign steel. The year is 847 AD, and you're about to discover why the sight of dragon-headed ships on the horizon has become the stuff of nightmares across medieval Europe. But let's step back. Right now, you're still blissfully unaware, going about your morning routine in your small coastal village of maybe 200 souls. The sun hasn't fully burned through the fog, and you're already tending to your barley fields, the same fields your father worked, and his father before him. Your village sits perfectly positioned along a navigable river, just inland enough to feel safe from pirates, but close enough to the sea for trade. It's this exact positioning that makes you wealthy enough to be worth raiding, and accessible enough to be doomed. The irony is brutal. Everything that makes your village prosperous is exactly what will make it a target. Your monastery holds silver chalices and illuminated manuscripts. Your granaries are full from last year's harvest. Your workshops produce fine woolens that traders carry as far as Constantinople. And most importantly, you have no standing army, no stone walls, no warning system. You are, in the cold calculation of Viking raiders, perfectly vulnerable. 20 miles offshore, Ragnar Eriksson adjusts the leather strap of his round shield and studies the coastline through the lifting fog. He's 24 years old, a veteran of 6 previous raids, and he commands 37 men crammed into a sleek longship that cuts through the waves like a knife through butter. This isn't his first time hitting the Frankish coast, and it won't be his last. Behind him, 2 more longships keep pace, their crews equally silent, equally focused. 112 Viking warriors, all told, are about to descend on your village like a pack of wolves on a flock of sheep. This isn't random violence. This is calculated warfare, planned with the precision of a chess master and executed with the efficiency of a machine. Ragnar's scouts have been watching your village for weeks, noting your routines, counting your able-bodied men, identifying your escape routes. They know your priest conducts morning prayers at dawn. They know your blacksmith starts his forge before sunrise. They know your fishermen launch their boats just after first light, taking away a dozen of your strongest men. They've timed this raid to hit you at your most vulnerable moment. The longship itself is a masterpiece of medieval engineering, though you'll have no time to appreciate its craftsmanship when it slides onto your beach in a shower of sand and seawater. 76 feet long, but only 16 feet wide, it draws less than 3 feet of water when fully loaded. This shallow draft means it can navigate rivers that larger ships can't touch, appearing suddenly in places where no ship should be able to reach. Its flexible construction allows it to ride over waves rather than smash through them, making it nearly unsinkable in skilled hands. More terrifying than its design is its speed. Under optimal conditions, this ship can reach 15 knots, faster than any other vessel of its era. But speed isn't just about escape. Speed is about the element of surprise that will shatter your peaceful morning like glass. By the time a lookout spots their sails, they'll be beaching their ships and forming their battle line. By the time you can grab a weapon, they'll already be inside your homes. Each warrior aboard carries weapons that represent months of a craftsman's labour and enough silver to buy a farm. Ragnar himself wears a shirt of iron rings that took a master smith an entire winter to forge, each ring individually riveted and tested. His sword, passed down from his grandfather, bears the name Bloodletter etched in runes along its fuller. The blade alone is worth more than your entire year's harvest, and he's brought it here to harvest something very different than grain. But most of his men aren't quite so well equipped. The typical warrior in this raiding party carries a spear with an iron head shaped like a willow leaf, a round wooden shield painted clan's colours with his, and a single-edged knife called a seax tucked into his belt. Some have axes, the preferred weapon of the middle-class Viking, with heads that can cleave through a man's skull or the wooden door of your church with equal ease. Only the wealthiest among them carry swords, those legendary pattern-welded blades that can cut through mail and bone as if they were parchment. Their shields aren't just defensive tools. Made from lindenwood and reinforced with iron, they're weapons in their own right. The iron boss in the center can crush a man's face, while the rim can break bones or deflect sword strikes. When these shields lock together in formation, they create an impenetrable wall of wood and iron that has broken the finest armies of Europe. Your farmers with their scythes and shepherds with their staffs won't stand a chance against this mobile fortress of war. As they row closer to shore, the Vikings begin their final preparations. They're not screaming or shouting. That comes later when the psychological warfare begins. Right now, they're professionals preparing for work. Weapons are checked one final time. Shields are positioned for quick deployment. The younger warriors, some barely 15 years old, try to control their breathing and remember their training. The veterans, scarred men who've survived dozens of these raids, methodically go through routines they could perform in their sleep. Their leader, Ragnar, isn't thinking about glory or Valhalla, despite what the Christian chroniclers will later write. He's thinking about logistics. His men need to hit fast and hard, grab everything of value, and be back on their ships before local forces can respond. Every minute on shore is a minute closer to disaster. Local lords might have cavalry. Neighbouring villages might send reinforcements. The tide might turn, stranding their ships. A successful raid requires the precision timing of a dancer and the ruthless efficiency of a butcher. They know exactly what they're looking for because they've done this before. Silver is the priority, whether it's in the form of coins, jewellery, or church ornaments. Iron tools and weapons are valuable, but heavy. Furs and fine textiles are worth taking if there's room. Grain is useful but bulky. And then there are the people, healthy young men and women, especially those with useful skills, are worth their weight in silver in the slave markets of Dublin or Birka. You, of course, know none of this. You're probably thinking about the weather, or wondering if your barley will be ready for harvest next week, or planning to visit the neighbouring village for their Saints' Day festival. The most violent thing in your recent memory was probably a dispute over grazing rights that got settled with harsh words, and maybe a shove or two. You've heard stories about Viking raids, of course, but they seemed as distant and unreal as tales of dragons or giants. The stories you've heard aren't even accurate. The monks who write the chronicles have their own reasons for exaggerating Viking brutality. They need to explain why God allowed pagans to desecrate holy places, so they paint the raiders as agents of divine punishment or forces of absolute evil. They describe berserkers who fight naked and feel no pain, supernatural warriors who can't be killed by ordinary weapons. They tell of ships filled with demons who drink blood from human skulls and sacrifice children to their heathen gods. The truth is, both more mundane and more terrifying. These aren't supernatural monsters. They're men, skilled warriors operating with cold efficiency and clear objectives. They're not here to destroy for the sake of destruction. They're here to get rich. They'll loot your village. The professional systematic way they'll manner, in which they'll round up captives. The business-like approach they'll take to deciding who lives and who dies, that's somehow more chilling than any tale of mythical berserkers. As their ships approach your beach, you're probably having breakfast, maybe porridge with honey if you're prosperous enough, maybe just bread and watered ale if times have been hard. Your children are playing in the dirt outside your hut, chasing chickens or building tiny castles from mud and stones. Your wife is already at her loom, working on the cloth that will keep your family warm through the coming winter. The morning sun is finally burning through the mist, promising a beautiful day. On the longships, the mood shifts. The professional silence gives way to something else, something that will freeze your blood when you hear it echoing across the water. It starts low, almost like a growl. then builds into a rhythmic chant. It's not the bloodthirsty war cry that Christian chroniclers describe. It's something far more purposeful, a working song that helps coordinate their final approach, a battle hymn that reminds them why they're here and what they're fighting for. The beach is perfect for their purposes. Sandy, gently sloping, with no rocks or obstacles to damage their ship's shallow keels. The morning tide is just right, high enough to bring them close to shore, but not so high that they'll be stranded when it turns. Everything about this moment has been calculated, planned, rehearsed. Nothing has been left to chance. Your village's location, which seems so advantageous when your grandfather first settled here, is about to become your curse. The river that brings trade goods also brings raiders. The fertile fields that feed your families also advertise your prosperity to anyone sailing past. The monastery that brings pilgrims and their donations also holds treasures that can be measured in pounds of silver. In less than an hour, the first Viking warrior will set foot on your beach. In less than 2 hours, your village will be transformed from a peaceful farming community into a scene of organized chaos. Some of you will survive. One of you will be hurt. Some dead onto those dragon ships and sail away to lives of slavery in lands whose names you've never heard. And some of you will become part of the stories that other villages tell their children. Cautionary tales about what happens when the mist lifts and reveals sails on the horizon. But to that's still come. Right now, in these peace, you're still safe final minutes of. Still ignorant, still alive and free and surrounded by everyone you've ever loved. The sun is shining, the birds are singing, and death is rowing steadily toward your shore with a crew of professional killers who view your entire world as nothing more than a business opportunity. The question isn't whether you'll survive what's coming. The question is what survival will cost you and whether the person who lives through the next few hours will still be recognizably you. The first arrow whistles past your ear before you even hear the war cry. You're bent over your turnip patch, pulling weeds from between the rows, when the shaft buries itself in the wooden post of your neighbor's fence with a solid thunk. For a heartbeat, you stare at it stupidly, your mind refusing to process what your eyes are seeing. The fletching is unfamiliar, the point broader than any hunting arrow you've ever seen. Then the screaming starts. It begins with old Henrik, the village's self-appointed watchman, whose voice cracks like a broken bell as he stumbles from his hut near the river path. Ships! Dragon ships! His words tumble over each other in panic. They're here! They're already here. Behind him, smoke begins to rise from the direction of the monastery, thin and black against the morning sky. This is the moment every coastal village has dreaded since the first dragon-proud ships appeared in Christian waters 50 years ago. This is your Lindisfarne moment, though you don't know that name yet. You don't know that in the year 793, Viking raiders destroyed the holy monastery on that island off the English coast, sending shockwaves through the Christian world. You don't know that their success there has inspired countless other raids, each one more organized and efficient than the last. What you do know is that the peaceful morning has shattered like a clay pot dropped on stone. The professional silence that marked the Vikings' approach has given way to something that will haunt your dreams for years to come, assuming you live long enough to have dreams. It's not the mindless howling that Christian chroniclers describe. It's something far more terrifying, a coordinated battle cry that serves multiple purposes at once. First, it's psychological warfare. The sound carries across your village like thunder, designed to freeze your blood and scatter your thoughts. But it's also communication. Each warrior knows his role, and the varying pitches and rhythms of the war with military cry coordinate their assault precision. The high, keening notes tell the archers when to loose their volleys. The deep, rhythmic chanting keeps the shield wall moving at optimal speed. The sharp, barking calls direct specific units to their assigned targets. You drop your weeding tool and run toward your hut, but you're already too late. The Vikings have been studying your village for weeks, and they know exactly where everyone lives, works, and hides. As you stumble through your doorway, calling for your wife and children, you can hear the systematic destruction beginning outside. Not random violence, but organized plundering executed with frightening efficiency. The sound of splintering wood fills the air as Viking axes bite into doors and shutters. These aren't the small hatchets you use for splitting firewood. These are specialized weapons designed for war and intimidation. The bearded axe, favored by many raiders, has a distinctive curved blade that can hook shields away from enemies or punch through wooden barriers. The larger Dane axe, wielded by veteran warriors, can cleave a man in half or shatter a door with a single blow. Your wife, Marta, emerges from behind the grain storage baskets, where she was hiding with your 2 young children. Her face is white with terror, but she's thinking more clearly than you are. "The root cellar," she whispers urgently. "Under the house. They might not find us there." She's wrong, of course. Viking raiders have been perfecting their craft for decades, and they know every hiding place that terrified villagers might use. But the illusion of a plan, even a doomed one, helps keep panic at bay. As you lift the wooden planks that cover your food storage pit, you can hear voices outside speaking in a language that sounds like gravel grinding against stone. Old Norse, though you don't know what to call it. The consonants are harsh, the rhythm unlike anything you've ever heard. One voice rises above the others, clearly giving orders. This is Ragnar, directing his men with the same casual authority your village headman uses when organizing the harvest. The Vikings have divided your village into sections, each assault group responsible for a specific area. It's not chaos. It's a carefully choreographed operation based on their reconnaissance. They know the monastery holds the greatest concentration of portable wealth. They know the blacksmith's workshop contains iron tools worth taking. They know which houses belong to the most prosperous families and which contain the strongest potential slaves. Your neighbour's roof catches fire, and orange light flickers through the gaps in your walls. The Vikings aren't burning randomly. Fire is a tool, used strategically to create confusion and force people from their hiding places. Smoke makes people cough, revealing concealed positions. Flames drive families into the open where they can be easily captured or killed. The acrid smell fills your nostrils as you huddle in the cramped space beneath your floor, trying to keep your children quiet. Above you, heavy footsteps cross your floor. You hear unfamiliar voices, discussing something in their grinding language. Through the wooden planks, you can make out individual words, though their meaning escapes you. What you don't realize is that they're evaluating your possessions with the practiced eye of professional appraisers. The carved chest your grandfather made, the iron cooking pot your wife inherited from her mother, the woolen cloak hanging from its peg. Each item is being assessed for weight, value, and portability. One of the children above, your 8-year-old son Henrik, named for his grandfather, starts to whimper. Marta presses her hand gently over his mouth, her eyes wide with desperation. The footsteps pause. In the silence that follows, you can hear your own heartbeat thundering in your ears. Then the steps resume, moving toward the door. Have they missed you? Have they decided your meager possessions aren't worth the effort of a thorough search? The answer comes in the form of an axe blade punching through the floorboard 6 inches from your head. Splinters shower down as the weapon withdraws and strikes again, systematically destroying your hiding place. Within moments, grey morning light streams through the gaps and a face appears in the opening. It's younger than you expected, maybe 20 years old, with pale blue eyes and a braided beard. He looks down at your family with the same detached interest a farmer might show when examining livestock. He calls out in his harsh language, and more faces appear. These aren't the monsters Christian chroniclers describe. They're men, young and old, some bearing scars from previous battles, others still smooth-faced with youth. What makes them terrifying isn't supernatural evil, but professional competence. They've done this before, many times, and they know exactly what they're doing. Or hands reach down and drag you from your hiding place. The grip is firm, but not unnecessarily brutal. These warriors understand that damaged goods are worth less in the slave markets. Your wife screams as she's pulled up, but stops abruptly when one of the Vikings raises his hand in a gesture that clearly means silence. Your children cling to her skirts, too terrified to make a sound. Outside, your village has been transformed into an organized nightmare. Vikings move between buildings with military precision, some carrying bundles of loot, others herding captured villagers toward the beach. The elderly priest from your monastery kneels in the mud, blood streaming from a cut on his scalp, while a Viking warrior examines the silver cross that was torn from around his neck. The blacksmith, a giant of a man who could bend iron bars with his bare hands, stands with his wrists bound, his face a mask of rage and helplessness. But not everyone has been captured. As you march toward the shore, you catch glimpses of the resistance that's forming. Your village headman, a grizzled veteran of border skirmishes with neighboring lords, has managed to gather a dozen men near the grain storage building. They're armed with whatever they could grab, farming tools mostly, but their faces show grim determination. They know they can't win, but they might buy time for others to escape. The Vikings know it too. A group of warriors forms up near your impromptu militia, shields locked together in the famous wall formation that has broken professional armies across Europe. These aren't the random peasant levies your headman has faced before. These are career warriors whose lives depend on their skill with weapons and their ability to fight as a unit. The shield wall advances slowly, deliberately. Each warrior's shield overlaps with his neighbour's, creating an impenetrable barrier of wood and iron. Between the shields, spear points protrude like the quills of some enormous hedgehog. Behind the wall, Vikings call out instructions and encouragement to each other. This isn't a charge. It's a measured advance that will crush your defenders like grain beneath a millstone. Your headman, brave fool that he is, leads his men in a desperate assault. Scythes and pitchforks clash against iron-bossed shields and pattern-welded spear points. The outcome is never in doubt. Within minutes, half your village's defenders are dead or dying in the mud. The rest throw down their weapons and surrender, hoping for slavery over death. As you watch this brief, hopeless battle, you begin to understand something that will change how you see the world forever. This isn't random violence or divine punishment for your sins. This is business. The Vikings are here to make a profit, and they'll use exactly as much force as necessary to achieve that goal. No more and no less. The speed and efficiency with which they've dismantled your entire world speaks to generations of experience and careful planning. A hand pushes you forward, and you stumble toward the beach where the dragon ships wait. Behind you, your village continues to burn, but already the Vikings are organizing their retreat. They've been on shore for less than 2 hours, but they've accomplished everything they came to do. The monastery has been stripped of its treasures. The most valuable villagers have been captured. Everything too heavy or bulky to carry has been destroyed to prevent its future use. This systematic approach reflects centuries of raiding experience. The first Viking raids were probably opportunistic affairs, launched by individual chieftains with a handful of ships. But success bred imitation and improvement. By the time these raiders beach their ships on your shore, they're the product of a military tradition that has refined the art of amphibious assault to a science. The longships themselves represent the cutting edge of naval technology. Built by master shipwrights using techniques passed down through generations, each vessel is a work of functional art. The overlapping straight construction gives them flexibility to ride over waves that would shatter more rigid ships. The shallow keel allows them to navigate rivers and beach on shores where deeper vessels would run aground. The square sail provides speed under favourable winds, while the long oars ensure mobility regardless of weather. But it's not just the ships that make these raids possible. It's the entire cultural and economic system that supports them. Back in Norway or Denmark, entire communities are invested in these expeditions. Farmers provide grain and livestock to supply the raiders. Craftsmen forge weapons and tools. Merchants arrange for the sale of slaves and loot. Women manage households and businesses while the men are away. The raid on your village isn't an isolated incident. It's part of a vast network of violence and commerce that spans the North Atlantic. As you're pushed toward the waiting ships, you catch sight of your son's face. He's trying not to cry, trying to be brave like his father, but terror shows in every line of his small features. He doesn't understand what's happening or why. All he knows is that strangers have destroyed his world and are taking him away from everything he's ever known. In a few hours, he'll be aboard a Viking ship, beginning a journey that will end in some distant slave market where he'll be sold like livestock to the highest bidder. If he's lucky, he'll be purchased by a relatively kind master who will treat him decently. If he's unlucky, he'll spend the rest of his short life in chains, working until he drops dead from exhaustion. Either way, the boy who played in the mud outside your hut this morning is gone forever. What remains will be shaped by violence and servitude into something you wouldn't recognize. The beach is a scene of controlled chaos as the Vikings load their human cargo and plunder onto the waiting ships. They work with practiced efficiency, dividing captives by age, gender, and apparent health. The strongest men go to one ship, destined for lives of hard labor. Young women go to another, their fate too obvious to contemplate. Children are distributed based on their size and perceived intelligence. Even in slavery, the Vikings are thinking about market value and profit margins. You're shoved toward the ship designated for adult male captives. As you stumble across the sand, you see your wife being dragged toward a different vessel. She calls your name once before a Viking warrior cuffs her across the mouth, not hard enough to damage her, but firmly enough to enforce silence. Your eyes meet for what might be the last time, and in that glance, you try to communicate everything you've never said, all the love and regret and desperate hope that somehow, somewhere, you might see each other again. The ship's crew is already preparing for departure. The tide has turned, and every minute they remain on shore increases their risk of discovery by local forces. In the distance, smoke signals rise from neighboring villages, warning of the raid. Soon, mounted warriors will converge on this beach, but they'll find nothing but burned buildings and scattered bodies. The dragon ships will be long gone, vanished into the morning mist like the nightmares they are. As you're forced into the cramped hull of the longship, surrounded by other terrified villagers, you get your first close look at the men who've destroyed your life. They're not the demons Christian monks describe in their chronicles. They're craftsmen, farmers and traders who've chosen warfare as their profession. Some are barely older than boys, while others show the grey hair and scarred faces of veteran campaigners. What unites them isn't bloodlust or supernatural evil, but a shared understanding of violence as a tool for achieving practical goals. The ship pushes away from the beach with a grinding sound of wood against sand. Within minutes, the sail is raised and the longship begins to cut through the swells with breathtaking speed. Behind you, your village shrinks to a smudge of smoke on the horizon. Ahead lies an uncertain future in foreign lands, among people who speak languages you've never heard and follow customs you can't imagine. But you're alive. Against all odds, you've survived the first few hours of a Viking raid. Now comes the harder test, surviving what follows. The journey across the North Sea, the slave markets, the years of bondage that await. Some captives don't make it past the first night aboard ship. Others live long enough to eventually buy or earn their freedom. A few even rise to positions of relative comfort and influence in their new homes. Which category will you fall into? That depends on choices you haven't made yet, strength you don't know you possess, and luck you can't control. The only certainty is that the person who boarded this ship is not the same one who woke up this morning in a peaceful farming village. That man is dead, killed as surely as if he'd fallen to a Viking axe. What remains is something new, something harder, something shaped by violence and loss, into a form you're only beginning to understand. The longship cuts through the grey waters with a sound like tearing silk, each stroke of the oars driving you further from everything you've ever known. The rhythm is hypnotic, almost soothing, until you remember that each beat carries you deeper into bondage. Around you, 30 other captives huddle in the cramped hull, their faces masks of shock and disbelief. The stench of fear sweat mingles with the salt spray and the peculiar smell of the ship itself. Pine tar and seal oil and something else you can't identify. Your wrists are bound with leather cords that bite into your skin whenever you move. The Vikings aren't cruel about it, just efficient. These bindings are designed to prevent escape without causing damage that would reduce your market value. Every aspect of your captivity has been calculated with the same cold precision they used to plan the raid itself. You're not a person anymore. You're cargo, and valuable cargo at that. The warrior sitting nearest to you, a man with iron-grey hair and ritual scars carved into his cheeks, occasionally offers you water from a leather flask. It's not kindness exactly. It's the same practical care a merchant might show for prize livestock. Dehydrated slaves die, and dead slaves are worthless. But there's something almost human in his weathered eyes, a flicker of recognition that you're more than just another piece of plunder. This contradiction will define your new existence. The Norse don't see slavery as inherently evil, the way Christian theologians do. In their world, thralls are simply the bottom rung of a social ladder that extends from kings to cattle. Some slaves live comfortable lives as trusted household servants or skilled craftsmen. Others endure backbreaking labour in fields and mines. Your fate depends on factors you can't control. Your apparent intelligence, your physical strength, your willingness to adapt to circumstances beyond your imagination. The ship's motion changes as they adjust course, and you catch a glimpse of the coast sliding past. These aren't random wanderings. The Vikings navigate with a precision that would astonish the learned monks in their monasteries. They read the colour of the water to judge depth, watch the flight patterns of seabirds to find land, use the position of the sun and stars to maintain their heading. Some carry sunstones, crystals that can locate the sun even through heavy clouds, allowing them to navigate in weather that would strand other ships. Their knowledge of currents and tides rivals that of any Mediterranean sailor. They know which beaches offer safe landing, which rivers can be navigated by shallow draft vessels, which coastal settlements are worth raiding, and which are too poor or too well defended to bother with. This raid on your village wasn't an accident or a crime of opportunity. It was the result of careful intelligence gathering and strategic planning that would do credit to any professional army. As the hours pass, you begin to understand the true scale of Viking operations. This isn't just one ship carrying off a few captives. It's part of a vast network of commerce and warfare that spans half the known world. The silver arm captors' whirrings worn by your probably melted down from Byzantine coins acquired in Constantinople. The amber beads in their jewellery came from the shores of the Baltic Sea. The steel in their weapons was forged using techniques learned from Frankish smiths, possibly by craftsmen who were themselves once slaves taken in raids like the one that claimed you. The interconnectedness is staggering. Your village's grain might end up feeding Viking settlements in Iceland. The iron tools from your blacksmith's shop could be traded to Slavic merchants on the Volga River. Your neighbours, if they survive their captivity, might find themselves working in Dublin slave markets, or building ships in Norwegian fjords, or serving in the households of Swedish jarls. The raid that destroyed your small world is just one thread in a tapestry of violence and commerce that stretches from Greenland to the Caspian Sea. But understanding the scope doesn't make your situation less terrifying. As evening approaches, from the bow, so temperature drops and spray axe through your thin woolen tunic. You're shivering uncontrollably now, and several of the older captives look dangerously pale. Viking ships aren't built for passenger comfort. There's no shelter from the weather, No privacy, barely enough room to lie down. You're exposed to wind and rain, and the constant threat of being washed overboard by a larger wave. The crew, meanwhile, seems perfectly comfortable in conditions that are slowly killing you. They've spent their lives on these ships, and they know how to stay warm and dry, even in the worst weather. Waterproof cloaks, made from treated sealskin, keep them comfortable while you freeze. Their leather boots and woolen stockings protect their feet, while yours grow numb from cold and wet. Even their food is designed for shipboard life. Dried meat and hardtack that won't spoil, cheese aged in wax to prevent contamination, ale that's safer to drink than water. As darkness falls, you get your first real look at Viking navigation techniques. The steersman, a grizzled veteran with arms like tree trunks, uses a combination of wind direction, wave patterns, and star positions to maintain course. There's no compass, no charts in the modern sense, just accumulated knowledge passed down through generations of seafarers. Yet they navigate with confidence across hundreds of miles of open ocean, making landfall within sight of their intended destinations. The night brings new terrors. In the darkness, every wave sounds like it might swamp the ship. Every change in the wind makes you wonder if you're being blown off course into empty ocean, where you'll die of thirst and exposure. The Vikings take shifts at the oars, maintaining their rhythm even when they can barely see the water. Their stamina is inhuman, the product of lives spent in constant physical activity and hardship that makes your farming existence look soft by comparison. But it's not just physical toughness that sets them apart, it's their entire worldview, their understanding of fate and honor, and the proper relationship between gods and men. To them, this raid isn't theft or murder. It's a test of courage ordained by Odin, the All-Father, who hung himself from the world tree to gain wisdom and who demands similar sacrifices from his followers. Every successful raid proves their worthiness in the eyes of the gods. Every piece of plunder is a gift from divine providence. This religious dimension makes them far more dangerous than simple pirates. Pirates raid for profit and flee when faced with serious resistance. Viking warriors raid for honor as well as wealth, and honor sometimes demands fighting to the death against impossible odds. The promise of Valhalla, where brave warriors feast eternally in Odin's hall, removes the fear of death that constrains ordinary men. They don't seek death, but they don't fear it either, and that makes them nearly unstoppable in battle. As the second day begins, you start to see other ships on the horizon. More dragon-headed longships heading in the same general direction, probably returning from raids of their own. This is the summer raiding season, when favourable weather and long daylight hours make overseas expeditions possible. All along the coasts of England, Ireland and France, similar scenes are playing out. Villages burning, monasteries looted, families torn apart and sold into slavery. The scale is almost impossible to comprehend. Conservative estimates suggest that tens of thousands of people are enslaved during a typical raiding season. Entire regions are depopulated as communities flee inland to escape the dragon ships. Trade routes are disrupted, causing economic chaos that ripples across medieval Europe. Kings bankrupt themselves paying tribute to make the raiders go away, only to face new demands the following year. Yet somehow, impossibly, European civilization not only survives, but adapts. The pressure of Viking raids forces improvements in military technology and tactics. Coastal fortifications become more sophisticated. Early warning systems are developed. Naval forces are created specifically to counter the longship threat. The very success of Viking raids breeds the innovations that will eventually contain them. You see none of this larger pattern, of course. Your world has contracted to the confines of a ship's hull, the faces of your fellow captives, and the uncertain future that awaits at journey's end. But you're part of something much larger than your personal tragedy. You're a participant in one of history's great transformations, the collision between pagan and Christian civilizations that will reshape the political and cultural landscape of Europe. The irony is bitter. Your ancestors probably came to this region as conquerors themselves, Germanic tribes pushing into former Roman territory, displacing earlier populations through violence and intimidation. Now you're experiencing the same process from the other side, learning what it means to be the conquered rather than the conqueror. History moves in cycles, and each generation discovers that the world isn't as stable as they believed. By the third day, several of the older captives are showing signs of serious illness. The combination of exposure, inadequate food, and psychological trauma is taking its toll. One elderly woman, probably someone's grandmother, lies motionless in the bottom of the ship. Her breathing is shallow and irregular, and her skin has taken on a grey pallor that speaks of approaching death. The Vikings notice but don't intervene. She's already too old to be valuable in the slave markets, and medicine costs money. This casual indifference to suffering is perhaps harder to bear than outright cruelty would be. Cruelty implies passion, some acknowledgement of your humanity even if it's expressed through hatred. Indifference is worse. It suggests that you simply don't matter enough to inspire any emotion at all. You're a commodity, and commodities don't deserve sympathy when they deteriorate. Yet even here, contradictions emerge. When a young child among the captives begins crying from hunger, one of the Vikings shares his dried meat. When another prisoner shows signs of serious dehydration, water is provided without being requested. These aren't acts of kindness exactly, but they're not pure callousness either. They reflect a practical understanding that damaged goods are less valuable than healthy ones, tempered by occasional flickers of basic human decency. The weather turns rough on the fourth day, and you experience the true terror of North Sea storms. Waves larger than houses crash over the bow, filling the hull with icy water that has to be constantly bailed out. The ship flexes and twists like a living thing, riding over swells that seem impossible to survive. Several times you're certain you're about to die, only to find the vessel still afloat when the wave passes. The Vikings handle the storm with professional competence, but even they look concerned. This is the kind of weather that kills ships and crews, regardless of skill or experience. They reef the sail and rely on the oars to maintain steerage, fighting to keep the bow pointed into the waves. It's exhausting work that requires perfect coordination. A single mistake could broach the ship and send everyone to the bottom of the sea. Through it all, you're amazed by the vessel's seaworthiness. The flexible construction that seems so fragile compared to the solid timber buildings of your village proves its worth in heavy seas. Instead of fighting the waves, the ship moves with them, bending and flexing in ways that would shatter a more rigid hull. It's a masterpiece of maritime engineering, refined through centuries of trial and error by people whose lives depended on getting the details right. As the storm passes, you catch your first glimpse of your destination. Low hills rise from grey water, their slopes covered with the green of early summer grass. Smoke rises from scattered settlements, and you can make out the masts of other ships anchored in protected harbours. This is the Norse homeland, the source of the raiders who've terrorised Christian Europe for generations. It looks surprisingly peaceful, almost pastoral. Nothing like the hellscape you'd imagined. The contrast is jarring. This could be any farming community anywhere in Northern Europe, except for the ships. Dozens of them, pulled up on beaches or anchored in the deeper water. Fishing boats and cargo vessels mixed with the sleek predators that carried death to your village. It's a reminder that Vikings aren't a separate species. They're farmers and merchants and craftsmen who happen to excel at organised violence during the summer months. The approach to landing reveals the true sophistication of Norse society. The harbour is carefully engineered, with stone jetties protecting the anchorage and wooden slips designed specifically for long ships. Warehouses line the shore, their contents carefully inventoried and guarded. This isn't a primitive society that relies solely on raiding for wealth. It's a complex civilization with established trade networks, skilled craftsmen, and accumulated capital. As your ship beaches on the sandy shore, you're struck by how normal everything seems. Children play in the shallows, their laughter carrying across the water. Women tend cooking fires and repair fishing nets. Men work on boat maintenance and discuss the weather in voices that sound remarkably similar to conversations you might have heard in your own village. The only difference is the language and the occasional glimpse of silver arm rings that probably came from some distant monastery's treasury. Your captors begin the process of unloading their human cargo with the same systematic efficiency they showed during the raid. Captives are sorted by age, gender, and apparent health. The strongest men go to one area, young women to another, children to a third. Even in importance of market seg slavery, the Norse understand the mentation. Different types of workers command different prices, and maximizing profit requires careful attention to detail. You're pushed toward a fenced enclosure where other male captives wait under guard. Some are clearly from recent raids, still showing signs of shock and disbelief. Others have been here longer, their expressions resigned or calculating. A few even seem relatively comfortable, engaged in quiet conversations with their guards. These are probably skilled craftsmen whose abilities make them valuable enough to receive better treatment. The guards themselves are an interesting study in contrasts. Some are obviously warriors, scarred veterans who watch the captives with professional alertness. Others look more like merchants or administrators, men whose weapons are sharp eyes and quick minds rather than swords and axes. The slave trade requires different skills than raiding does, and successful Norse communities develop specialists in both areas. As evening falls, you're given your first real meal since the raid began. It's simple fare, porridge and dried fish, but it's filling and reasonably fresh. More importantly, it's served in proper bowls with wooden spoons, a small dignity that reminds you you're still human despite your circumstances. The psychological impact is significant. Despair begins to lift slightly, replaced by the faint possibility that survival might be achievable, captives shareable. The other information in whispered conversations. Some have been here for weeks, waiting for the right buyer or the next slave ship to carry them further from home. They've learned fragments of the Norse language and picked up useful information about their captors' society. Most importantly, they've identified which guards might be bribed, which masters treat their slaves relatively well, and which skills are most valued in the local economy. This intelligence network among the enslaved is your first glimpse of how people adapt to impossible circumstances. Within days of losing everything, survivors begin rebuilding some form of community and mutual support. It's not enough to restore what was lost, but it's enough to maintain hope and sanity in the face of overwhelming despair. Human resilience, you're learning, extends far beyond what you previously thought possible. The night brings new revelations about Norse society. Families gather around cooking fires, sharing meals, and stories that sound remarkably similar to the ones you remember from your own childhood. Children receive patient instruction in practical skills. Elderly relatives are treated with respect and care. Apart from the language and the occasional display of exotic plunder, this could be any prosperous farming community. The contradiction is profound. These are the people who destroyed your world, yet they clearly love their own families and communities with the same fierce devotion you felt for yours. They're not monsters or demons, despite what Christian chroniclers claim. They're ordinary humans who've organized their society around different values and opportunities. The violence they inflict on others is balanced by genuine affection for their own people. This realization forces you to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of civilized behavior. Is your own society really so different? Haven't your own people fought wars against neighboring kingdoms, enslaved prisoners, and celebrated victories that meant death and suffering for others? The Vikings may be more efficient at organized violence, but they didn't invent it. They've simply perfected techniques that every warrior culture has used throughout history. As you drift towards sleep on the hard ground of your temporary prison, you begin to understand that survival will require more than just physical endurance. You'll need to learn new languages, new customs, new ways of thinking about the world, and your place in it. The person who went to sleep in a peaceful farming village 5 days ago is gone forever. What remains must be rebuilt from whatever fragments of identity and purpose can be salvaged from the wreckage. The process has already begun. You're thinking strategically now, evaluating options and calculating risks in ways that would have been foreign to your former self. The man who worried about crop yields and village gossip is being replaced by someone harder and more pragmatic. Someone capable of navigating a world where strength and cunning matter more than tradition and community ties. Tomorrow will bring new challenges. Evaluation by potential buyers, decisions about your ultimate destination, the beginning of whatever life awaits in bondage. But tonight, surrounded by other survivors of similar tragedies, you're still alive and still capable of hope. That's more than many of your neighbors can say, and in a world where survival itself is an achievement, it's enough to sustain you through whatever darkness lies ahead. The stars wheel overhead, the same constellations that shone down on your village, but seen now from an impossible distance. They offer no comfort and no guidance, just the cold reminder that the universe is vast and indifferent to human suffering. But they also remind you that some things endure even when everything else changes. Knowledge, courage, love, hope. These aren't lost just because your circumstances have been transformed. They're buried, perhaps, but not destroyed. And buried things, if tended carefully, can sometimes grow again. The slave market opens at dawn, and you're awakened by the sound of iron bells ringing across the harbour. Around you, other captives stir from restless sleep, their faces etched with the same hollow exhaustion that's become your constant companion. A Norse merchant approaches your enclosure, his silver arm rings catching the early morning light as he evaluates his potential purchases with the calculating gaze of a livestock trader. This is Kaupang, one of the great trading centres of the Viking world, and you're about to become intimately familiar with its most profitable industry. The town stretches along a protected bay, its wooden buildings rising in terraced rows from the waterfront to the hills beyond. Smoke from countless hearth fires mingles with the salt air, creating a haze that softens the edges of your new reality without making it any less brutal. The merchant speaks in Norse to your guards, gesturing toward different groups of captives. His words are incomprehensible, but his meaning is clear enough. He's negotiating prices, discussing quality, arranging terms of sale. You catch fragments of conversation from other buyers, men whose accents suggest they've travelled from distant lands to attend this human auction. Arabic syllables mix with Slavic consonants and Germanic vowels, a linguistic testament to the vast reach of Viking commerce. Your fellow prisoners react differently to the morning's developments. Some retreat into themselves, staring at nothing with eyes that have desperate optimism, which seen too much. Others maintain, spearing plans for escape or rescue that everyone knows will never come. A few display the calculating pragmatism of born survivors, already studying their potential masters for signs of character and temperament. The process begins with a physical examination that strips away the last vestiges of your human dignity. Norse buyers inspect captives like horses at a fair, checking teeth, muscles and scars for evidence of health and working capacity. Your hands are examined for calluses that might indicate useful skills. Your back is checked for whip marks that might suggest a troublesome disposition. Even your hair is scrutinized, as certain colors and textures command premium prices in distant markets. You pass this degrading inspection without incident, your years of farm labor having left you with the kind of practical strength that buyers value. The merchant nods approvingly and makes a note on a wax tablet, probably recording your estimated worth in silver or trade goods. Behind him, a scribe with ink-stained fingers updates longer records, maintaining the careful documentation that makes Norse commerce so efficient. The actual auction unfolds with business-like precision. Captives are brought forward individually or in small groups, their qualities announced in Norse while buyers call out bids. The auctioneer, a silver-haired man whose voice carries clearly across the marketplace, maintains order with the practiced authority of someone who's conducted thousands of these sales. This isn't chaos or random cruelty. It's organized commerce that happens to deal in human lives. When your turn comes, you're pushed onto a wooden platform that elevates you above the crowd of potential buyers. The auctioneer's voice drones through what must be a description of your attributes, gesturing toward your arms and shoulders to emphasize your apparent fitness for heavy labor. Several men in the crowd show interest, their bids driving your price steadily higher. You've become a commodity whose value is determined by market forces you can't control or understand. The winning bidder is a weathered man in his 40s whose silver-trimmed cloak suggests considerable wealth. His name, you'll later learn, is Thorvald Eriksson, and he owns extensive farmlands in the Norwegian highlands, where strong backs are always needed for clearing forest and breaking new ground. His bid of 40 silver pieces makes you more expensive than a good horse, but less valuable than a trained craftsman. You occupy the middle tier of human merchandise, valuable enough to receive decent treatment, but not precious enough to inspire special care. Chains replace the leather bonds that have held you since the raid, iron links that connect your wrists to those of 3 other newly purchased slaves. The weight is symbolic as much as practical, a constant reminder that you're no longer free to make your own choices. But there's also something almost comforting about the metal's solidity. These chains represent a kind of stability, a guarantee that you have value to someone even if that value is purely economic. The journey to Thorvald's holdings takes 8 days of hard travel through landscape that grows progressively wilder and more remote. Pine forests stretch endlessly in all directions, broken occasionally by clearings where earlier generations of settlers have carved farmland from the wilderness. The paths you follow are little more than animal tracks, winding between massive trees whose trunks could shelter entire families. Your new master rides a sturdy pony while you and the other slaves walk, but he doesn't push the pace beyond what you can reasonably maintain. This isn't kindness, exactly, but practical management. Exhausted slaves are less productive than rested ones, and Thorvald has invested too much in your purchase to waste your strength on ship. When unnecessary high you stumble from fatigue, he calls a halt and allows everyone to rest. When the iron shackles chafe your wrists raw, he provides strips of cloth for padding. The other members of your chain gang come from different raids across northern Europe. There's Osric, a Saxon warrior whose village was destroyed during a raid on the English coast. Beside him walks Padric, an Irish monk whose monastery fell to Viking axes 3 months ago. The 4th member of your group is Clovis, a Frankish merchant who made the mistake of travelling too close to the coast during raiding season. Each man carries his own story of loss and displacement, but survival requires focusing on the present rather than dwelling on the past. During evening camps, you begin learning fragments of Norse from Thorvald's men. The language feels harsh and angular compared to the familiar rhythms of your native tongue, but necessity is a powerful teacher. Arbeid means work, mat means food, vile means rest. These basic concepts define the boundaries of your new existence, and mastering them becomes essential for avoiding punishment or misunderstanding. Thorvald himself occasionally joins these informal language lessons, correcting pronunciation or explaining more complex concepts through gestures and simple drawings. His motivations are purely practical, efficient communication with his workforce, but there's something almost human in these interactions. He's not cruel or sadistic, just a businessman who happens to own other human beings. The distinction matters less than it should, but it makes daily survival marginally easier. The landscape changes as you travel further inland, becoming more mountainous and heavily forested. Ancient glaciers have carved deep valleys between towering peaks, creating dramatic vistas that would be beautiful under different circumstances. Waterfalls thunder down rock faces into crystal clear lakes that reflect the sky like polished metal. It's a harsh but magnificent country, well suited to people who value strength and endurance above comfort. Your destination proves to be a substantial farmstead occupying a natural terrace overlooking a river valley. The main hall is built in the traditional Norse style, with massive timber posts supporting a steep pitched roof designed to shed heavy snow. Smaller buildings cluster around it, workshops and storage facilities, and quarters for the various workers who keep this remote enterprise functioning. Smoke rises from multiple chimneys, suggesting a community of perhaps 50 people living and working together in relative isolation. The existing slaves GR ranging from simpete your arrival with expressions, athi to calculation. Some offer whispered advice about avoiding trouble or earning small privileges. Others maintain careful distance, unwilling to risk their own precarious positions by associating with newcomers who might prove troublesome. A few display the hollow-eyed resignation of people who've been broken by years of bondage and no longer remember what freedom felt like. Your introduction to the community follows established protocols that speak to generations of experience with slave management. You're assigned to a sleeping space in one of the outbuildings, given basic tools and work clothes, and paired with an experienced thrall who will teach you the routines and expectations that govern daily life. The system is neither cruel nor kind, just efficient in the way that Norse society approaches most practical problems. The work itself proves to be exactly what you expected: clearing forest, breaking ground, building fences, all the back-breaking labour required to expand agricultural holdings in a challenging environment. The hours are long and the physical demands severe, but the tasks themselves are familiar from your previous life as a farmer. Your muscles remember how to swing an axe and guide a plough, even if the context has changed dramatically. What surprises you is the relative stability of your new situation. You're fed regularly, housed adequately, and treated with the same practical consideration given to valuable livestock. Thorvald's prosperity depends on maintaining a productive workforce, and he understands that starving or abusing his slaves would be economically counterproductive. It's a cold calculation, but one that works in your favour as long as you remain useful. The other slaves come from across the known world, a testament to the reach of Viking raiding and trading networks. There's Dmitri, a Slav captured during raids along the Volga River. Beside him works Ailbe, an Irish woman whose skills at weaving make her particularly valuable. Muhammad, a captured Arab merchant, manages Thorvald's accounts with mathematical precision that his owner finds invaluable. Each person represents a different thread in the vast tapestry of Norse commerce and conquest. This diversity creates an unexpected sense of community among the enslaved. Language barriers force the development of a simplified communication system based on gestures, shared work rhythms, and the universal human need for companionship. You find yourself learning words in half a dozen languages, creating a pidgin vocabulary that allows basic conversation across cultural boundaries that seemed insurmountable just weeks ago. The seasonal rhythms of Norse life provide structure to your new existence. Summer means long days of outdoor labour, taking advantage of the brief growing season to accomplish as much as possible before winter returns. Autumn brings the frantic rush of harvest, when everyone works frantically to gather and preserve enough food to last through the dark months ahead. Winter offers relative rest, with most work moving indoors to workshops where tools are repaired and crafts are practiced. These seasonal changes affect your treatment as well as your duties. During the busy summer months, you're pushed hard, but fed well. Your caloric needs recognized as essential for maintaining productivity. Winter brings reduced rations but also reduced expectations, a balance that reflects the practical Norse understanding of human limitations. Even slaves need enough food and rest to survive until the next working season begins. Your integration into the community proceeds gradually, marked by small victories and minor setbacks. Learning to understand Thorvald's instructions without constant translation. Mastering the specific techniques required for working Norwegian timber. Earning enough trust to be allowed occasional trips to nearby settlements for supplies or trade. Each achievement represents a step toward stability, if not quite toward acceptance. The religious dimensions of your captivity prove more complex than expected. Thorvald and his family are devout followers of the Norse gods, but they don't actively persecute Christian slaves or force conversion to their beliefs. This tolerance stems from practicality rather than principle. If a slave works better while maintaining his own spiritual practices, interfering with those practices would be counterproductive. You're allowed to pray to your Christian God in private, as long as you don't disrupt the household's pagan rituals. This religious freedom, limited though it is, becomes one of your most important sources of psychological strength. Prayer provides a connection to your former life and identity, a reminder that some parts of yourself remain unchanged despite your altered circumstances. The familiar words and concepts offer comfort during the darkest moments, when the weight of your situation threatens to crush hope entirely. The Norse religious calendar also affects your daily routine in ways both subtle and obvious. Thor's Day brings special feasts where even slaves receive extra food and ale. The winter solstice celebration includes gift-giving that extends to the entire household, including the enslaved workers. These occasions don't erase the fundamental injustice of your situation, but they provide brief respites from the grinding routine of forced labor. More importantly, they offer glimpses into the worldview that drives Norse society. These aren't monsters who delight in causing suffering for its own sake. They're people who believe the gods favor the strong and successful, who see raiding and conquest as natural expressions of divine will. Your enslavement isn't personal vindictiveness, but the inevitable result of being on the losing side of conflicts ordained by forces beyond human control. This understanding doesn't make your situation more bearable, but it does make it more comprehensible. The Vikings who destroyed your village weren't acting from hatred or sadism, but from cultural imperatives that made perfect sense within their own moral framework. They took slaves because their society required slave labor, just as it required iron tools and wooden ships and all the other elements that made Norse civilization possible. The economic realities of your situation become clearer as months pass. You're not just a worker, but an investment, one that Thorvald expects to provide returns over many years. Your purchase price must be recovered through your labor, but beyond that lies the possibility of profit through your continued productivity. This creates a perverse incentive for decent treatment. You're more valuable healthy than sick, cooperative than rebellious, skilled than unskilled. Understanding these economics allows you to navigate your circumstances more effectively. Demonstrating useful abilities increases your value and improves your treatment. Learning Norse language and customs makes you more versatile and therefore more valuable. Even small acts of initiative or problem-solving can earn recognition and slightly better conditions. You're playing a game whose rules were established long before your capture, but playing it well can mean the difference between mere survival and something approaching tolerable existence. The other slaves pursue similar strategies with varying degrees of success. Those who adapt quickly to Norse expectations find their situations gradually improving. Those who resist or fail to understand the system face harsher treatment, and reduced prospects are brutal. It's a form of natural selection that rewards flexibility and pragmatism while punishing pride and inflexibility. As your first winter in captivity approaches, you realize that you've unconsciously begun thinking in terms of years rather than days. The immediate shock of enslavement has given way to a longer-term perspective focused on survival and gradual improvement of conditions. You're not planning escape, at least not actively. The distances involved and the harsh climate make such attempts nearly suicidal. Instead, you're adapting, changing in ways you never thought possible. This adaptation extends beyond mere survival strategies. You find yourself genuinely interested in Norse craftsmanship techniques, fascinated by their methods of working iron and wood. You begin to appreciate the austere beauty of their poetry and the complex relationships between their gods. You even develop grudging respect for Thorvald's competence as a manager and landowner. recognizing skills that transcend the moral questions raised by his ownership of human beings. These psychological changes disturb you more than the physical hardships do. The man who was captured outside his turnip patch would be horrified by your growing accommodation to circumstances he would have found unthinkable. Yet this flexibility may be the only thing standing between you and complete despair. The choice seems to be between changing or breaking, and you've chosen to change. The long winter nights provide time for reflection and planning that the busy summer months don't allow. Sitting by the fire in the slaves' quarters, sharing stories and gossip with your fellow captives, you begin to see patterns in the experiences of those who've been here longer. Some have earned positions of trust and responsibility that make their bondage almost comfortable. Others have saved enough money from small payments and gifts to purchase their freedom. A few have even married into Norse families, their children born free despite their own enslaved status. These success stories, rare though they are, provide hope that your current situation isn't necessarily permanent. The Norse legal system recognizes manumission, the formal freeing of slaves, and creates incentives for masters to reward exceptional service with eventual liberty. It's not guaranteed, and it typically takes many years of faithful service, but it's possible. That possibility, however distant, provides motivation to endure present hardships while working toward a better future. The arrival of spring brings both relief and renewed anxiety. Relief because the harsh winter is ending and outdoor work will resume. Anxiety because spring also means the return of raiding season, when young men like those who destroyed your village will set sail in search of new targets. You find yourself wondering you're about and neighbours' family own, whether any survived that terrible morning, whether they've rebuilt their lives or fallen victim to subsequent raids. These thoughts lead to painful recognition that you'll probably never know the answers to such questions. The world you knew has become as distant as a childhood dream, separated from your present reality by an unbridgeable gulf of time and circumstance. The man who worried about crop yields and village gossip is gone, replaced by someone harder and more pragmatic, someone capable of finding satisfaction in small improvements to an inherently unjust situation. Yet even this transformed version of yourself retains connections to earlier identities and values. You still remember your wife's laugh and your children's faces, still feel anger at the injustices you've witnessed, still maintain hope for eventual reunion or redemption. These emotional continuities provide stability in a world where everything else has changed, anchors that prevent complete dissolution of identity even under the most extreme pressures. As the year cycle completes and you face your second summer in captivity, you understand that survival has required becoming someone you never expected to be. The process isn't finished, may never be finished as long as you remain enslaved. But you've learned that human beings possess reserves of adaptability and resilience that can carry them through experiences that once seemed impossible to endure. The knowledge brings both comfort and unease. Comfort because it suggests you'll continue surviving whatever challenges lie ahead. Unease because it raises questions about the nature of identity and the price of adaptation that you're not ready to answer. For now, it's enough to have made it through one full cycle of seasons in your new life. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges and opportunities, but you've proven to yourself that you can meet them. The dragon ships that brought you here are preparing for another season of raids, their crews eager for the wealth and glory that successful expeditions provide. Somewhere across the North Sea, other villages are beginning their day in peaceful ignorance of the violence approaching their shores. The cycle continues, as it has for generations, and will for generations more, until changing circumstances finally make such raids impossible or unprofitable. But that's a story for another day, another season, another year. For now, you have work to do, Norse words to learn, and small freedoms to earn through patient service. The man who was captured outside his turnip patch is gone forever, but what remains is still recognizably human, still capable of hope and growth and adaptation. In a world where such qualities often determine who lives and who dies, that's no small achievement. The seasons turn with relentless precision in your new world, and you begin to understand that survival requires more than just physical endurance. It demands a complete reconstruction of identity, piece by careful piece. By your second autumn in Thorvald's service, you've learned to read the subtle signs that indicate his mood and intentions. The way he adjusts his silver arm rings when pleased with the day's work. The particular tone he uses when issuing commands that brook no argument. The slight softening around his eyes when he's considering some small reward for exceptional effort. These observations aren't idle curiosity. They're survival skills as essential as knowing which mushrooms are poisonous or how to read weather patterns. Thorvald holds absolute power over your daily existence, and understanding his temperament can mean the difference between adequate food and hunger, between manageable work assignments and brutal punishment details. You've become a student of human nature in ways you never imagined necessary. The other slaves have taught you that information is currency in this constrained world. Who among the Norse household favours which captives? Which guards can be approached for small favours, and which ones respond to any request with violence? When Thorvald's wife, Astrid, is most likely to grant permission for minor privileges, like extra food or time to tend personal needs. These fragments of intelligence circulate through whispered conversations during brief rest periods, creating an informal network that helps everyone navigate the treacherous waters of enforced servitude. Winter's approach brings both relief and apprehension. Relief because the back-breaking outdoor labour will soon give way to lighter indoor work. Apprehension because the long months of confinement test psychological endurance in ways that physical hardship cannot. You've watched strong men break during previous winters, their minds fracturing under the weight of endless dark hours spent contemplating lost freedom and destroyed lives. The cold kills bodies, but boredom and despair destroy souls. Thorvald, for all his practical competence, understands this dynamic. He assigns winter projects that keep his slaves mentally engaged while producing useful results. Weapon maintenance, tool crafting, leather working, even simple carpentry tasks that require concentration and skill. It's not kindness exactly, but enlightened self-interest. Slaves who retain their sanity are more productive when spring returns, and productivity translates directly into profit. Your own winter assignment involves working alongside Einar, the household's master craftsman, learning advanced techniques for working iron and wood. Einar is himself a freed slave, a Saxon captured 20 years ago, who earned his liberty through exceptional skill and unwavering loyalty. His story offers both hope and warning. Hope because manumission is possible for those who prove their worth. Warning because achieving freedom required decades of patient service and the gradual erosion of his original identity until he became more Norse than Saxon. The workshop becomes your sanctuary during the dark months, a place where the familiar rhythms of craftsmanship provide psychological anchor points. The ring of hammer on anvil, the precise cuts of well-sharpened tools, the satisfaction of creating something useful and beautiful from raw materials. These activities connect you to memories of your previous life, while simultaneously preparing you for whatever future awaits. Skill is portable wealth, valuable regardless of your legal status. Einar proves an excellent teacher, patient with mistakes but demanding of effort. He explains not just techniques, but the reasoning behind them, the accumulated wisdom that separates master craftsmen from mere labourers. Under his guidance, you begin producing work that draws approving nods from Thorvald, and even occasional praise from visiting merchants. Your value as property increases with every demonstration of improved ability, but more importantly, your self-respect begins its slow recovery from the depths of enslavement. The Norse attitude towards skilled labour differs markedly from what you knew in your previous life. Christian society often viewed manual work as punishment for original sin, something to be endured rather than celebrated. Norse culture, by contrast, honors the craftsman who can transform raw materials into objects of beauty and utility. Thor himself is a smith god, and the greatest treasures of the Aesir were forged by skilled artisans. This cultural difference affects how you're treated as your abilities develop, earning respect that transcends your legal status as property. Spring's return brings the familiar acceleration of activity as Thorvald's household prepares for another year of agriculture and trade. But this year, you notice changes in the broader pattern of Norse society that suggest larger transformations are underway. Fewer young men depart for overseas raiding expeditions. More emphasis is placed on local trade and manufacturing. The conversations you overhear speak less of glory won in battle and more of profits earned through commerce. These shifts reflect the gradual evolution of Viking civilization from raiding economy to settled society. The easy targets have been exhausted, horrified beyond fought profitable attack. Christian kingdoms have developed effective counter-strategies that make raids increasingly dangerous and expensive. Meanwhile, the wealth accumulated through generations of successful expeditions is being invested in land, livestock, and productive enterprises that generate steady returns without the risks of overseas adventure. For slaves like yourself, these changes create new opportunities alongside familiar hardships. A society focused on production rather than predation has greater need for skilled workers and less tolerance for the waste inherent in brutal treatment of valuable human resources. You begin to see evidence of this shift in small improvements to living conditions, more varied food, better clothing, even occasional payments of small amounts of silver for exceptional work. The payments, tiny though they are, represent something more significant than their monetary value. They acknowledge your humanity in ways that pure subsistence never could, recognizing that you have interests and desires beyond mere survival. The silver pieces accumulate slowly in a small leather pouch you're allowed to keep, tangible evidence that freedom might eventually be purchasable rather than merely hoped for. Other slaves pursue different strategies for improving their situations. Padraig, the captured Irish monk, has become invaluable to Thorvald as a keeper of accounts and correspondence. His literacy in Latin provides access to international trade networks that illiterate Norse merchants cannot navigate independently. This intellectual labour earns him privileges that manual workers never receive, including his own small room and exemption from the heaviest physical tasks. Dmitri, the captured Slav, has taken a different path entirely. His knowledge of Eastern trade routes and languages makes him an ideal interpreter and negotiator for transactions with merchants from Kiev and Constantinople. He travels frequently with Thorvald to trading centres, experiencing a degree of freedom that borders on actual liberation. His chains have been replaced by economic incentives that make escape both unnecessary and counterproductive. These success stories inspire hope while highlighting the varied paths that lead from bondage toward freedom. There's no single strategy that works for everyone, but common elements emerge from careful observation. Useful skills, demonstrated loyalty, cultural adaptation, and patience all play crucial roles in determining which slaves eventually escape their circumstances and which remain trapped indefinitely. Your own path becomes clearer as your craftsmanship abilities develop and your understanding of Norse society deepens. Thorvald increasingly relies on your judgment regarding technical matters, consulting you about tool design and construction techniques. This advisory role, informal though it remains, represents a significant evolution from your initial status as simple manual labour. You're becoming indispensable in ways that create mutual dependency rather than one-sided exploitation. The relationship remains fundamentally unequal. You're still property that can be sold or traded at Thorvald's whim, but practical considerations increasingly constrain his theoretical absolute authority. Replacing you would be expensive and disruptive, requiring time and resources that could be better invested elsewhere. Your growing value provides a form of job security that approaches actual protection, even without legal rights. Summer brings visitors from distant lands, merchants and diplomats, whose presence offers glimpses into the broader world beyond Thorvald's isolated farmstead. You hear languages you recognize from your previous life, Latin spoken by Christian envoys and Germanic dialects that remind you of home. These encounters reawaken memories you've learned to suppress, flooding back with intensity that threatens your carefully constructed emotional equilibrium. One visitor, a Frankish merchant named Claude, speaks briefly with you in a dialect close enough to your native tongue that communication is possible. He brings news from regions near your former home, casual observations about political developments and economic conditions that paint a picture of a world continuing to exist despite your absence from it. The revelation that life has proceeded normally without you is somehow more painful than imagining universal catastrophe in your wake. Claude's presence also provides perspective on how far you've travelled, both geographically and culturally, since your capture. The man he speaks with is recognisably derived from the farmer who was taken from his turnip patch, but transformed by experiences that have left permanent marks on personality and worldview. You find yourself translating concepts and explaining situations that would have been incomprehensible to your former self, evidence of how completely circumstances have reshaped your understanding of human possibilities. The merchant departs after several days of negotiations, taking with him some of the items you've crafted during the winter months. Knowing that objects bearing your maker's marks will travel to distant markets provides unexpected satisfaction, a form of immortality through craftsmanship that transcends your personal circumstances. Your skills have created value that will outlast your individual existence, a legacy more enduring than the biological children you may never see again. Autumn arrives with news that affects every household in the region. A new Christian king has taken power in one of the southern kingdoms, proclaiming his intention to end Viking raids through diplomatic rather than military means. He offers substantial payments for the return of captured Christians and promises favourable trading relationships with Norse communities that cease hostile activities. The proposal creates intense debate among local leaders, splitting them between those who see opportunity and those who view the offer as weakness to be exploited. Thorvald finds himself caught between competing pressures and opportunities. His household includes dozens of Christian slaves whose ransom value might exceed their long-term productive worth. But releasing experienced workers would create immediate labour shortages that could take years to resolve through new purchases or training programs. The decision requires careful calculation of short-term gains against long-term stability, the kind of complex economic analysis that successful Norse leaders must master. For you and the other Christian captives, the king's proclamation represents the first realistic hope of return to your previous lives since the day of your capture. But hope proves more painful than despair in many ways, reawakening desires and possibilities that had been safely buried beneath layers of pragmatic acceptance. The prospect of freedom forces confrontation with questions you've avoided. What remains of the person you were? Could you readjust to the life that was stolen from you? Would your family even recognize the man you've become? These psychological challenges prove as daunting as the practical obstacles to liberation. Years of adaptation to Norse society have created habits and perspectives that might not translate back to Christian civilization. You've learned to think in Norse concepts, to appreciate aspects of pagan culture that would have horrified your former self, to find satisfaction in relationships and activities that exist outside Christian moral frameworks. Returning home might require another complete reconstruction of identity, equally difficult and potentially more disorienting than the original transformation. The debate continues through the winter months as Thorvald weighs his options and consults with other landowners facing similar decisions. Some choose immediate profit, selling their Christian slaves back to the southern kingdoms for substantial ransoms. Others decide to retain their experienced workers gambling that the long-term value of skilled labor exceeds the short-term gains from manumission payments. A few pursue hybrid strategies, freeing some captives, while retaining others based on individual assessments of value and loyalty. Thorvald's decision, when it finally comes, reflects the practical wisdom that has made him prosperous. He will offer freedom to those Christian slaves who wish to return home, but at prices that reflect their true economic value to his household. Those who choose to remain can do so under improved conditions that acknowledge their voluntary service. It's not the blanket liberation that Hope had painted, but it's a genuine choice that restores some measure of human dignity to decisions about your future. The price Thorvald sets for your freedom is substantial, but not impossible. 40 pieces of silver, the same amount he paid for your purchase years ago, plus compensation for the training and support you've received. It's a sum that would take decades to accumulate through the small payments you receive for exceptional work, but not so large as to be purely theoretical. More importantly, Thorvald indicates willingness to accept partial payment over time, allowing you to work toward freedom through a combination of savings and continued service. Other slaves face different calculations based on their individual circumstances and skills. Padraig, the Irish monk, discovers that his ransom has already been arranged by his former monastery, which has raised funds specifically for redeeming captured religious. Dmitri, the Slavic trader, chooses to remain voluntarily, recognizing that his current position provides more opportunity and security than returning to his devastated homeland would offer. Each decision reflects personal priorities and circumstances that can't be reduced to simple formulas. Your own choice requires weeks of agonizing consideration. Return to your previous life means abandoning the skills and relationships you've developed, accepting the loss of years that can never be recovered, facing the possibility that your family has given you up for dead or moved on without you. Remaining means accepting permanent exile from everything you once knew, while building a new life based on the foundations you've already established. The decision becomes easier when you realize it's not really about choosing between past and future, but about acknowledging the reality of irreversible change. The man who was captured from his turnip patch no longer exists except as memory and motivation. What remains is someone shaped by experiences that have fundamentally altered priorities, capabilities, and understanding. This transformed person can choose his path based on present circumstances, rather than nostalgic attachment to a life that can never be restored. You choose freedom, but freedom defined on your own terms, rather than those imposed by circumstances beyond your control. The silver you've accumulated over years of careful saving provides the foundation for negotiating a manageable payment plan. Your demonstrated skills ensure that independent survival is possible, even probable. Most importantly, your hard-won understanding of Norse society provides the cultural knowledge necessary to navigate freedom successfully, rather than stumbling blindly toward new disasters. The formal ceremony of manumission takes place on a crisp morning in early spring, witnessed by Thorvald's entire household and several neighbouring landowners. The legal formula is ancient, derived from customs that predate written law, but its meaning is unmistakable. The iron collar that has marked your servitude for years is removed and ceremonially broken. Thorvald speaks the words that transform you from property to person, while you swear the oaths that define your obligations as a freed man. The transformation is more psychological than physical. Your circumstances change gradually rather than dramatically, as practical arrangements must be made for housing, employment, and integration into free society. But the knowledge that you now control your own destiny, subject only to the same limitations that constrain all free men, creates a lightness of spirit that physical comfort could never provide. You are no longer owned. You belong to yourself. The freed slave who emerges from this ceremony bears little resemblance to the captured farmer who began this journey years ago. You speak Norse as fluently as your native tongue, understand pagan customs as well as Christian traditions, possess craft skills that command respect and economic value. You've learned to navigate complex social relationships, to calculate risks and opportunities with cold precision, to adapt to circumstances that once seemed impossible to endure. These acquired abilities represent more than mere survival strategies. They constitute a new identity, forged through suffering and tempered by experience, possessing capabilities and perspectives that your former self could never have imagined. The process has been brutal, and the costs enormous, but what remains is genuinely stronger and more adaptable than what was lost. You have not simply survived Viking captivity. You have been transformed by it into someone capable of thriving in a world where such transformations are the price of continued existence. The dragon ships still prowl northern waters, their crews seeking the wealth and glory that successful raids provide. But their golden age is ending, constrained by improved defences, changing economics, and the gradual evolution of Norse society toward more settled patterns of life. You have witnessed this transformation from a unique perspective, experiencing both its brutality and its creative potential in ways that few others can claim. Your story is one of thousands similar tales scattered across medieval Europe, each representing an individual tragedy that contributed to broader historical patterns. The Viking Age was built on such personal catastrophes, sustained by the systematic exploitation of humans suffering for economic and political gain. Yet it also created opportunities for adaptation and growth that might not have existed under more stable circumstances. The question posed at the beginning of this journey, could you survive a Viking raid on your village, has received its answer through lived experience rather than theoretical speculation. Survival is possible, but it requires a complete reconstruction of identity and purpose that amounts to the death of who you were and the birth of who you must become. The price is enormous, but for those strong enough and flexible enough to pay it, life continues in forms that earlier selves could never have imagined. The morning mist rises from the harbour as you begin your new life as a free man in a land that was once foreign, but has become home through necessity and choice. Behind you lies a trail of loss and adaptation that stretches back to that terrible dawn when dragon ships first appeared on your horizon. Ahead lies uncertainty, but uncertainty faced with hard-won knowledge and capabilities that make survival not just possible, but probable. You have learned the most important lesson that the Viking Age could teach: that human beings possess reserves of adaptability and resilience that can carry them through experiences that seem impossible to endure. The knowledge is bitter, purchased with everything you once held dear. But it is also empowering, providing confidence that whatever challenges the future might hold, you possess the strength and flexibility to meet them on your own terms. The cycle of raid and resistance, conquest and adaptation continues around you as it has for generations, and will for generations more. But you are no longer its victim. You are its survivor, marked by its passage, but not destroyed by it. In a world where such survival represents genuine achievement, that knowledge provides foundation enough for whatever comes next. The morning sun climbs higher, burning away the last traces of mist that concealed your captor's approach. As you stand on the deck of the longship, watching the Norwegian coast grow larger with each stroke of the oars, you begin to grasp the true scope of what you've survived. This wasn't just a random attack by desperate men seeking easy plunder. It was part of a vast economic system that spans continents, a carefully orchestrated machine of violence and commerce that has been perfecting itself for over a century. The evidence surrounds you in ways you're only now learning to recognize. The amber beads adorning your captor's clothing originated from Baltic shores hundreds of miles to the east. The silk threads woven into their finest cloaks travelled overland from Constantinople, following trade routes that stretched to the very edges of the known world. Even the silver they used to purchase you came from mines in the distant mountains of Afghanistan, carried by merchants whose journeys make your own forced voyage seem like a brief afternoon sail. This interconnectedness reveals the Viking Age for what it truly is. Not a period of random barbarism, but a systematic expansion of Northern European civilization into every corner of the medieval world. Your village was targeted not because it was convenient, but because it fit precisely into economic calculations that weigh transportation costs against expected profits, risk assessment against potential rewards. Someone somewhere made a careful decision that your community's wealth justified the expense of mounting a military expedition to claim it. The mathematical precision underlying these operations becomes clearer as you observe the crew's daily routines. Every piece of equipment aboard this vessel serves multiple purposes, maximizing utility while minimizing weight and space requirements. The leather water containers double as emergency flotation devices. The iron cooking pots can be used as helmets in desperate circumstances. Even the ship's ballast stones are carefully selected for their potential value as trade goods in distant markets where such materials are scarce. This efficiency extends to human resources as well. The 37 warriors who destroyed your village aren't just muscle-bound thugs recruited from tavern brawls. They're skilled professionals whose abilities complement each other in carefully planned ways. The young men provide raw physical strength for rowing and heavy lifting. The middle-aged veterans contribute tactical expertise gained through decades of successful campaigns. The handful of older warriors serve as navigators and negotiators, their knowledge of languages and customs proving invaluable when dealing with foreign merchants and officials. Their leader, Ragnar, embodies this blend of violence and sophistication that defines successful Viking commanders. He can read Latin well enough to evaluate captured manuscripts, calculate exchange rates for different currencies, and navigate by stars whose names he learned from captured Irish monks. But he can also split a man's skull with a single axe blow, or organize a shield wall that will hold against professional cavalry. These aren't contradictory skills in his world. They're complementary aspects of the same fundamental competency, the ability to impose his will on a hostile environment through whatever means prove most effective. The ship's construction tells a similar story of practical intelligence applied to complex challenges. Every timber has been shaped to serve multiple functions, creating a vessel that's simultaneously strong enough to survive North Sea storms and flexible enough to ride over waves that would shatter more rigid designs. The overlapping strakes allow the hull to twist and flex without breaking, while the shallow keel enables navigation in waters too shallow for deeper draft vessels. It's a masterpiece of engineering that required centuries of incremental improvements to perfect. Yet for all its sophistication, this technology serves purposes that your Christian upbringing struggles to comprehend. These aren't explorers seeking new lands for peaceful settlement. Though some Vikings certainly pursue such goals, these aren't merchants engaged in mutually beneficial trade, though commerce forms an essential part of their activities. These are pre-hunters daters, apex who have identified human civilization itself as their prefer. The distinction prey species matters more than semantic precision might suggest. Predators operate according to different rules than either explorers or merchants. They seek out weakness and vulnerability rather than opportunity and mutual benefit. They invest in tools of intimidation and violence rather than communication and negotiation. Most importantly, they view their prey not as fellow human beings deserving of moral consideration, but as resources to be harvested as efficiently as possible. This predatory mindset shapes every aspect of Viking society in ways both obvious and subtle. Their gods celebrate warriors who die in battle, rather than farmers who feed the hungry or craftsmen who create beauty. Their poetry glorifies successful raids rather than successful harvests. Their legal system awards compensation for violence against fellow Vikings while offering no protection whatever for foreign slaves. You're learning to navigate a moral universe where different rules apply to different categories of humanity, and your category provides no protection against anything your captors might choose to do. The weather turns colder as you sail further north, and the landscape becomes progressively more dramatic. Steep-sided fjords cut deep into mountainous coastlines, their dark waters reflecting towering cliffs that seem to scrape the very clouds. Waterfalls plunge hundreds of feet into the sea, their roar audible even over the sound of wind and waves. It's a harsh and magnificent country, well suited to people who measure worth through survival rather than comfort. The other captives respond differently to these changing surroundings. Some retreat further into themselves, overwhelmed by the alien grandeur of landscapes unlike anything they've ever imagined. Others display desperate fascination, clutching at any distraction from their circumstances. A few maintain the calculating pragmatism of born survivors, studying everything they see for information that might prove useful later. Each response reflects different strategies for maintaining sanity in situations that challenge the very foundations of normal human experience. Your own reactions surprise you with their complexity. Part of you recognizes genuine beauty in these northern vistas, an austere magnificence that speaks to something deep within human nature. Another part remains focused entirely on practical concerns. Wind patterns that might affect your captor's plans, landing sites that might offer opportunities for escape, seasonal changes that could alter the conditions of your bondage. These dual perspectives exist simultaneously, without apparent contradiction, evidence of the psychological adaptability that extreme circumstances can unlock. The approach to your final destination reveals the true scale of Viking maritime operations. Dozens of ships crowd the protected harbour, ranging from fishing boats barely large enough for 2 men to massive cargo vessels capable of carrying entire households' worth of goods and people. Some bear the sleek lines of purpose-built warships, while others show the broader beams and deeper holds of merchant vessels. All share the distinctive shallow draft and flexible construction that allows them to navigate waters inaccessible to Mediterranean or Atlantic designs. The harbour itself represents centuries of accumulated engineering knowledge applied to the challenges of northern maritime commerce. Stone breakwaters protect the anchorage from storm waves, while wooden piers provide loading facilities for different types of cargo. Warehouses line the shore, their contents carefully organised and guarded. Even the arrangement of buildings reflects sophisticated understanding of logistics and security, with the most valuable goods stored furthest from the water where they're less vulnerable to raids by rival groups. This infrastructure didn't appear overnight. It represents the accumulated investment of generations of successful raiders and traders, each adding improvements based on lessons learned through experience. The wealth that built these facilities came from places like your village, extracted through violence and transformed into permanent installations that will support future expeditions. Your personal tragedy is literally built into the foundations of Norse prosperity, your family's suffering converted into stone and timber that will outlast everyone involved in creating it. The human cost of this development becomes visible as you're marched through the town's streets toward the slave markets. Everywhere you look, you see evidence of other people's destroyed lives incorporated into the fabric of Norse society. Foreign slaves perform most of the manual labour, their diverse origins apparent in their varied physical features and linguistic fragments. Captured craftsmen work in specialised workshops, their skills harnessed to produce goods that will be traded back to the very regions from which they were stolen. Even the domestic servants in prosperous households show signs of foreign birth, their presence testament to countless individual tragedies like your own. Yet the Norse themselves don't seem to view this system as particularly cruel or unusual. Slavery has existed in their society for as long as anyone can remember, and the recent expansion of raiding activities simply provides more slaves rather than fundamentally changing social relationships. Masters expect obedience and hard work from their human property, but many also develop genuine affection for slaves who serve them faithfully over many years. Some households treat their thralls almost like family members, albeit family members who can be sold if circumstances require it. This casual acceptance of human bondage reflects deeper assumptions about the nature of social relationships, that your Christian background struggles to process. Norse culture operates on fundamentally hierarchical principles, where everyone from kings to cattle occupies a specific position in a cosmic order established by the gods themselves. Slaves aren't oppressed victims in this worldview. They're simply people who occupy the lowest rung of a ladder that extends all the way to Odin's throne in Asgard. Understanding these cultural foundations doesn't make your situation more acceptable, but it does make it more predictable. Your captors aren't acting from personal malice or random cruelty. They're following established patterns of behavior that their society not only tolerates, but actively celebrates. This knowledge provides no comfort, but it does offer strategic insight into how their system operates and where opportunities for improvement might eventually emerge. The slave auction proceeds with business-like efficiency that strips away any remaining illusions about your status in this new world. Buyers examine you like livestock, checking your teeth and muscles for signs of health and strength. Your hands are scrutinized for calluses that indicate useful skills. Your posture is evaluated for evidence of submissiveness or defiance. Every aspect of your physical and psychological condition is assessed for its potential contribution to some stranger's economic interests. The bidding itself follows established protocols that reflect generations of experience in human commerce. Different categories of slaves command different price ranges based on age, gender, apparent health, and demonstrated abilities. Young women bring premium prices for reasons you prefer not to contemplate. Skilled craftsmen command substantial sums from buyers who recognize their long-term value. Even children are evaluated according to their potential for training and their likely working lifespans. Your own sale concludes when a prosperous-looking farmer successfully outbids several competitors for the right to own you. His name is Bjorn Thorson, and his silver arm rings suggest considerable wealth derived from successful agricultural ventures in the fertile valleys surrounding this coastal trading center. His bid of 35 silver pieces places you in the middle range of human merchandise, valuable enough to receive decent treatment, but not precious enough to inspire exceptional care. The formal transfer of ownership involves legal ceremonies that emphasize the permanence and legitimacy of your new status. Witnesses observe as silver changes hands and documents are prepared recording the transaction. Your new master speaks ritual words that establish his absolute authority over your person, while simultaneously accepting responsibility for your welfare. It's a binding contract recognized throughout Norse society, one that will govern every aspect of your daily existence for years to come. Chains replace the ropes that have bound you since the raid. Iron links that connect your wrists to those of two other newly purchased slaves. The weight is both practical and symbolic, preventing escape attempts while constantly reminding you of your changed circumstances. But the metal's solidity also represents a form of security. These chains prove that you have value to someone, even if that value is purely economic. In a world where worthless people are simply killed, being worth chaining offers a perverse form of protection. The journey to Bjorn's farmstead takes you through landscapes that grow progressively more remote and mountainous. Ancient forests stretch endlessly in all directions, broken occasionally by clearings where earlier generations carved agricultural land from the wilderness. The paths you follow are little more than animal tracks, winding between trees whose trunks could shelter entire families. This is frontier country where human presence remains precarious despite centuries of settlement efforts. Your new master travels on horseback while you and the other slaves walk, but he maintains a pace you can reasonably sustain. This isn't mercy, just practical management of valuable property. Exhausted slaves are less productive than rested ones, and Bjorn has invested too much in your purchase to waste your strength through unnecessary hardship. When you stumble from fatigue, he calls brief halts for rest and water. When the iron shackles chafe your wrists raw, he provides strips of cloth for padding. These small considerations offer glimpses into the complex psychology of slave ownership in Norse society. Bjorn isn't cruel or sadistic, but neither is he particularly compassionate. He's a businessman who understands that maintaining his human assets in good condition serves his long-term interests. Your welfare matters to him precisely to the extent that it affects your productivity and market value. It's a cold calculation, but one that works in your favor as long as you remain useful. The other members of your chain gang come from different raids across the Viking world. There's Eric, a Danish farmer whose village fell to Norwegian raiders seeking to settle old territorial disputes. Beside him walks Con, an Irish fisherman captured during a raid on the Western Isles. The third member of your group is Pavel, a Slavic merchant who made the fatal mistake of travelling too close to Viking territory during raiding season. Each man carries his own story of loss and displacement, but survival requires focusing on present circumstances rather than dwelling on irretrievable past. During evening camps, you begin learning basic Norse words and phrases from Bjorn's guards. The language feels harsh and angular compared to your native tongue, but necessity proves an effective teacher. Arbeider means work, mat means food, hvile means rest. These simple concepts define the boundaries of your new existence, and mastering them becomes essential for avoiding punishment or misunderstanding. Bjorn occasionally joins these informal language lessons, correcting pronunciation or explaining more complex ideas through gestures and simple drawings. His motivations remain purely practical. Effective communication improves workforce efficiency. But there's something almost human in these interactions that suggests he recognizes your fundamental humanity, even while legally owning your person. The distinction between recognizing humanity and respecting human rights proves crucial in determining how bearable your new existence will become. The weather grows colder as you travel deeper into the Norwegian interior, and you begin to understand why Viking raids follow such predictable seasonal patterns. Summer's brief warmth provides the only window for overseas expeditions in these northern latitudes. Winter's harsh conditions make long-distance travel virtually impossible, while simultaneously creating urgent needs for food, fuel, and shelter that can only be met through careful preparation during the warmer months. This seasonal cycle shapes every aspect of Norse society in ways both obvious and subtle. The timing of raids must account for weather patterns, agricultural schedules, and the availability of crews whose other responsibilities permit temporary absence from home communities. The wealth extracted through raiding finances the preparations necessary to survive northern winters, while simultaneously providing a self-ream for capital for future expeditions. Itsing system, where success enables further success, while failure often leads to starvation or death from exposure. Your destination proves to be a substantial farmstead, occupying a natural terrace above a river valley. The main hall follows traditional Norse architectural patterns, with massive timber posts supporting a steep pitched roof designed to shed heavy snow loads. Smaller buildings cluster around it, workshops and storage facilities and quarters for the various workers who keep this remote enterprise functioning. Smoke rises from multiple chimneys, suggesting a community of perhaps 40 people living and working together in relative isolation. The existing slaves greet your arrival with expressions ranging from sympathy to careful calculation. Some offer whispered advice about avoiding trouble or earning small privileges. Others maintain distance, unwilling to risk their own positions by associating with newcomers who might prove troublesome. A few display the hollow resignation of people broken by years of bondage, their spirits crushed by experiences too terrible to contemplate. Each reaction teaches important lessons about the range of possible adaptations to circumstances beyond anyone's control. Your introduction to the community follows established protocols refined through generations of experience with slave management. You're assigned sleeping space in one of the outbuildings, given basic tools and work clothes, and paired with an experienced thrall who will teach you the routines and expectations governing daily life. The system operates with mechanical efficiency. neither cruel nor kind, just ruthlessly practical in ways that characterize most aspects of Norse society. The work itself proves exactly what you expected: clearing forest, breaking ground, building fences, all the backbreaking labour required to expand agricultural holdings in challenging environments. The hours are long and physical demands severe, but the tasks themselves feel familiar from your previous life as a farmer. Your muscles remember how to swing an axe and guide a plough, even though the context has changed completely. What surprises you is the relative predictability of your new situation. You're fed regularly, housed adequately, and treated with the same practical consideration given to valuable livestock. Bjorn's prosperity depends on maintaining productive workers, and he understands that starving or abusing slaves would damage his own economic interests. It's calculating rather than compassionate, but it creates conditions where survival becomes possible rather than merely theoretical. The other slaves represent the global reach of Viking raiding networks. Their diverse origins, testament to the scope of Norse maritime operations. There's Yusuf, an Arab merchant captured during raids on Iberian coastal cities. Beside him works Brigid, an Irish woman whose weaving skills make her particularly valuable. Stefan, a captured Frankish craftsman, manages metalworking projects with expertise his owner finds indispensable. Each person embodies a different thread in the vast tapestry of Norse commerce and conquest. This diversity creates unexpected opportunities for cultural exchange among the enslaved population. Language barriers force development of simplified communication systems based on gestures, shared work rhythms, and universal human needs for companionship. You find yourself learning words in multiple languages, creating a pidgin vocabulary that enables basic conversation across cultural boundaries that seemed insurmountable just weeks earlier. The seasonal rhythms of Norse agricultural life provide structure to your transformed existence. Summer means endless days of outdoor labour, maximizing productivity during the brief growing season. Autumn brings frantic harvest activities when everyone works desperately to gather enough food for winter survival. Winter offers relative rest, as most work moves indoors to workshops where tools are maintained and crafts practiced during the long dark months. These seasonal changes affect your treatment as well as your duties. During busy summer periods, you're pushed hard but fed well, your caloric needs recognized as essential for maintaining productivity. Winter brings reduced rations balanced against reduced expectations, reflecting practical Norse understanding of human limitations even in bondage. The calculations remain coldly economic, but they create rhythms that make long-term survival feasible. Your gradual integration into the community proceeds through small victories and minor setbacks that slowly accumulate into something approaching stability. Learning to understand Bjorn's instructions without constant translation. Mastering specific techniques for working Norwegian timber and stone. Earning enough trust to be assigned occasional tasks outside the immediate farmstead. Each achievement represents progress toward a more bearable existence, if not actual freedom. The religious dimensions of your captivity prove more complex than expected. Bjorn and his family follow traditional Norse beliefs, but they don't actively persecute Christian slaves or demand conversion to their gods. This tolerance stems from practicality rather than principle. Slaves work better when allowed to maintain their spiritual practices, so interfering would reduce productivity. You're permitted private prayer as long as it doesn't disrupt household pagan rituals. This limited religious freedom becomes one of your most important psychological anchors. Prayer provides connection to your former identity and values, reminding you that some aspects of yourself remain unchanged despite radically altered circumstances. The familiar words and concepts offer comfort during dark moments when the weight of bondage threatens to crush hope entirely. Faith doesn't change your situation, but it helps preserve the person experiencing that situation. The Norse religious calendar affects your daily routine in ways both subtle and obvious. Thor's Day brings special feasts where even slaves receive extra food and ale. Winter solstice celebrations include gift-giving that extends throughout the entire household, creating brief moments of shared humanity that transcend legal distinctions between free and enslaved. These occasions don't erase fundamental injustices, but they provide respite from the grinding routine of forced labour. More significantly, they offer insights into the worldview that drives Norse society. These aren't monsters who delight in causing suffering for its own sake. They're people who believe their gods favour strength and success, viewing raiding and conquest as natural expressions of divine will. Your enslavement isn't personal vindictiveness, but the inevitable result of being on the losing side of conflicts ordained by cosmic forces beyond human influence. This understanding doesn't make your situation more acceptable, but it does make it more comprehensible. The Vikings who destroyed your village acted from cultural imperatives that made perfect sense within their moral framework. They enslaved you because their society required slave labour, just as it required iron tools and wooden ships, and all the other elements that made Norse civilization possible. Your personal tragedy serves larger purposes in ways that transcend individual malice or kindness. As months pass, you begin to grasp the economic realities underlying your circumstances. You're not just a worker, but an investment expected to provide returns over many years. Your purchase price must be recovered through labour. But beyond that lies potential profit through continued productivity. This creates perverse incentives for decent treatment. You're more valuable healthy than sick, cooperative than rebellious, skilled than unskilled. Understanding these economics enables more effective navigation of your constrained circumstances. Demonstrating useful abilities increases your value and improves your treatment. Learning Norse language and customs makes you more versatile and therefore more valuable. Even small displays of initiative or problem-solving can earn recognition and marginally better conditions. You're playing a game whose rules existed long before your capture, but playing it skillfully can mean the difference between mere survival and something approaching tolerable existence. The long winter nights provide time for reflection that summer's relentless labour schedule doesn't allow. Sitting by fires in the slaves' quarters, sharing stories with fellow captives, you begin recognizing patterns in the experiences of survived longer those who've periods of bondage. Some have earned positions of trust and responsibility that make their slavery almost comfortable. Others have accumulated enough savings to begin purchasing their freedom. A few have even married into Norse families, their children born free, despite their own enslaved origins. These success stories, rare though they remain, demonstrate that current circumstances aren't necessarily permanent. Norse legal systems recognize manumission and create incentives for masters to reward exceptional service with eventual liberty. It's not guaranteed and typically requires many years of faithful service, but it's genuinely possible. That possibility, however distant, provides motivation to endure present hardships while working toward improved futures. The return of spring brings both relief and renewed anxiety. Relief because harsh winter conditions are ending and outdoor work will resume. Anxiety because spring also marks the beginning of raiding season, when young men like those who destroyed your village will launch new expeditions seeking fresh targets. You find yourself wondering about surviving family and neighbours, whether they've rebuilt their lives or fallen victim to subsequent attacks. These thoughts lead to painful recognition that you'll probably never learn the answers to such questions. The world you knew has become as distant as childhood dreams, separated from present reality by unbridgeable gulfs of time and circumstance. The man who worried about crop yields and village gossip is gone, replaced by someone harder and more pragmatic, someone capable of finding satisfaction in small improvements to inherently unjust situations. Yet even this transformed version of yourself retains connections to earlier identities and values. You still remember loved ones' faces and voices, still feel anger at witnessed injustices, still maintain hope for eventual reunion or redemption. These emotional continuities provide stability in a world where everything else has changed, preventing complete dissolution of identity even under extreme pressures. As your second year in captivity begins, you understand that survival has required becoming someone you never expected to be. The process isn't finished, and may never be finished as long as you remain enslaved. But you've learned that human beings possess reserves of adaptability and resilience, capable of carrying them through experiences that once seemed impossible to endure. The knowledge brings both comfort and unease. Comfort because it suggests continued survival regardless of future challenges. Unease because it raises disturbing questions about the nature of identity and the price of adaptation that you're not ready to answer. For now, it's enough to have completed one full cycle of seasons in your transformed life. Tomorrow will bring new challenges and opportunities, but you've proven to yourself that you can meet them. The dragon ships are preparing for another season of raids, their crews eager for wealth and glory that successful expeditions provide. Somewhere across northern seas, other villages are beginning peaceful days in ignorant bliss of violence approaching their shores. The cycle continues as it has for generations and will for generations more, until changing circumstances finally make such raids impossible or unprofitable. But that transformation lies in an unimaginable future. For now, you have work to do, Norse customs to learn, and small freedoms to earn through patient service. The man captured from his turnip patch is gone forever, but what remains is still recognizably human, still capable of hope and growth and adaptation. In a world where such qualities often determine survival, that represents no small achievement. The seasons turn with relentless precision in your new world, and you begin to understand that survival requires more than just physical endurance. It demands a complete reconstruction of identity, piece by careful piece. By your second autumn in Bjorn's service, you've learned to read the subtle signs that indicate his mood and intentions. The way he adjusts his silver arm rings when pleased with the day's work. The particular tone he uses when issuing commands that brook no argument. The slight softening around his eyes when he's considering some small reward for exceptional effort. These observations aren't idle curiosity. They're survival skills as essential as knowing which mushrooms are poisonous or how to read weather patterns. Bjorn holds absolute power over your daily existence, and understanding his temperament can mean the difference between adequate food and hunger, between manageable work assignments and brutal punishment details. You've become a student of human nature in ways you never imagined necessary. The other slaves have taught you that information is currency in this constrained world. Who among the Norse household favors which captives? Which guards can be approached for small favors, and which ones respond to any request with violence? When Bjorn's wife, Astrid, is most likely to grant permission for minor privileges, like extra food or time to tend personal needs. These fragments of intelligence circulate through whispered conversations during brief rest periods, creating an informal network that helps everyone navigate the treacherous waters of enforced servitude. Winter's approach brings both relief and apprehension. Relief, because the backbreaking outdoor labour will soon give way to lighter indoor work. Apprehension, because the long months of confinement test psychological endurance in ways that physical hardship cannot. You've watched strong men break during previous winters, their minds fracturing under the weight of endless dark hours spent contemplating lost freedom and destroyed lives. The cold kills bodies, but boredom and despair destroy souls. Bjorn, for all his practical competence, understands this dynamic. He assigns winter projects that keep his slaves mentally engaged while producing useful results. Weapon maintenance, tool crafting, leatherworking, even simple carpentry tasks that require concentration and skill. It's not kindness exactly, but enlightened self-interest. Slaves who retain their sanity are more productive when spring returns, and productivity translates directly into profit. Your own winter assignment involves working alongside Einar, the household's master craftsman, learning advanced techniques for working iron and wood. Einar is himself a freed slave, a Saxon captured 20 years ago, who earned his liberty through exceptional skill and unwavering loyalty. His story offers both hope and warning. Hope because manumission is possible for those who prove their worth. Warning because achieving freedom required decades of patient service and the gradual erosion of his original identity until he became more Norse than Saxon. The workshop becomes your sanctuary during the dark months, a place where the familiar rhythms of craftsmanship provide psychological anchor points. The ring of hammer on anvil, the precise cuts of well-sharpened tools, the satisfaction of creating something useful and beautiful from raw materials. These activities connect you to memories of your previous life while simultaneously preparing you for whatever future awaits. Skill is portable wealth, valuable regardless of your legal status. Einar proves an excellent teacher, patient with mistakes but demanding of effort. He explains not just techniques, but the reasoning behind them, the accumulated wisdom that separates master craftsmen from mere labourers. Under his guidance, you begin producing work that draws approving nods from Bjorn and even occasional praise from visiting merchants. Your value as property increases with every demonstration of improved ability, but more importantly, your self-respect begins its slow recovery from the depths of enslavement. The Norse attitude towards skilled labour differs markedly from what you knew in your previous life. Christian society often viewed manual work as punishment for original sin, something to be endured rather than celebrated. Norse culture, by contrast, honours the craftsman who can transform raw materials into objects of beauty and utility. Thor himself is a smith god, and the greatest treasures of the Aesir were forged by skilled artisans. This cultural difference affects how you're treated as your abilities develop, earning respect that transcends your legal status as property. Spring's return brings the familiar acceleration of activity as Bjorn's household prepares for another year of agriculture and trade. But this year, you notice changes in the broader pattern of Norse society that suggest larger transformations are underway. Fewer young men depart for overseas raiding expeditions. More emphasis is placed on local trade and manufacturing. The conversations you overhear speak less of glory won in battle and more of profits earned through commerce. These shifts reflect the gradual evolution of Viking civilization from raiding economy to settled society. The easy targets have been exhausted or fortified beyond profitable attack. Christian kingdoms have developed effective counter-strategies that make raids increasingly dangerous and expensive. Meanwhile, the wealth accumulated through generations of successful expeditions is being invested in land, livestock, and productive enterprises that generate steady returns without the risks of overseas adventure. For slaves like yourself, these changes create new opportunities alongside familiar hardships. A society focused on production rather than predation has greater need for skilled workers and less tolerance for the waste inherent in brutal treatment of valuable human resources. You begin to see evidence of this shift in small improvements to living conditions, more varied food, better clothing, even occasional payments of small amounts of silver for exceptional work. The payments, tiny though they are, represent something more significant than their monetary value. They acknowledge your humanity in ways that pure subsistence never could, recognizing that you have interests and desires beyond mere survival. The silver pieces accumulate slowly in a small leather pouch you're allowed to keep, tangible evidence that freedom might eventually be purchasable rather than merely hoped for. News arrives with the spring trading season that affects every household in the region. A new Christian king has taken power in one of the southern kingdoms, proclaiming his intention to end Viking raids through diplomatic rather than military means. He offers substantial payments for the return of captured Christians and promises favourable trading relationships with Norse communities that cease hostile activities. The proposal creates intense debate among local leaders, splitting them between those who see opportunity and those who view the offer as weakness to be exploited. Bjorn finds himself caught between competing pressures and opportunities. His household includes dozens of Christian slaves, whose ransom value might exceed their long-term productive worth. But releasing experienced workers would create immediate labour shortages that could take years to resolve through new purchases or training programs. The decision requires careful calculation of short-term gains against long-term stability, the kind of complex economic analysis that successful Norse leaders must master. For you and the other Christian captives, the king's proclamation represents the first realistic hope of return to your previous lives since the day of your capture. But hope proves more painful than despair in many ways, reawakening desires and possibilities that have been safely buried beneath layers of pragmatic acceptance. The prospect of freedom forces confrontation with questions you've avoided. What remains of the person you were? Could you readjust to the life that was stolen from you? Would your family even recognize the man you've become? These psychological challenges prove as daunting as the practical obstacles to liberation. Years of adaptation to Norse society have created habits and perspectives that might not translate back to Christian civilization. You've learned to think in Norse concepts, to appreciate aspects of pagan culture that would have horrified your former self, to find satisfaction in relationships and activities that exist outside Christian moral frameworks. Returning home might require another complete reconstruction of identity, equally difficult and potentially more disorienting than the original transformation. The debate continues through the winter months as Bjorn weighs his options and consults with other landowners facing similar decisions. Some choose immediate profit, selling their Christian slaves back to the southern kingdoms for substantial ransoms. Others decide to retain their experienced workers, gambling that the long-term value of skilled labour exceeds the short-term gains from manumission payments. A few pursue hybrid strategies, freeing some captives while retaining others based on individual assessments of value and loyalty. Bjorn's decision, when it finally comes, reflects the practical wisdom that has made him prosperous. He will offer freedom to those Christian slaves who wish to return home, but at prices that reflect their true economic value to his household. Those who choose to remain can do so under improved conditions that acknowledge their voluntary service. It's not the blanket liberation that Hope had painted, but it's a genuine choice that restores some measure of human dignity to decisions about your future. So, there you have it. The brutal mathematics of survival in the Viking Age. Your chances of living through a raid on your medieval village depended on factors mostly beyond your control: your age, your skills, your gender, and pure luck. But history shows us that humans possess remarkable reserves of adaptability and resilience. Those who survived did so not through heroic resistance, but through flexibility, pragmatism, and the willingness to become someone entirely different than who they once were. The Vikings didn't just raid for gold and silver, they reshaped the entire fabric of medieval Europe, forcing innovations in defense, diplomacy, and commerce that would define the continent for centuries. Your village's destruction would have been just one thread in a tapestry of violence and transformation that stretched from Greenland to Constantinople. In the end, the question isn't really whether you could survive a Viking raid. It's whether you could survive what came after.